Welcome to another episode of the Farmers Risk podcast. Here I have today I have the pleasure of being joined by Eric Oseland. He is a director of agronomy and research at Missouri Soybeans. Eric and I have known each other since Little League, I think, sixth grade ish. Grew up in the different small towns, but in the same county of Effingham County in southern Illinois. So, Eric, great to catch up with you today from a personal friendship standpoint, but also to discuss kind of your role at Missouri Soybean. So I'm gonna start the conversation off with a softball. For somebody who's never been to Teutopolis, Illinois, define Teutopolis, Illinois.
Yeah, it's a small. I think we have I think T-Town's about 1,800 now. Um, it's a small little Catholic community, uh, home of the wooden shoes. It's got a big grain wheat mill in the middle of town. It's kind of got a lot of cool history to it. But yeah, it's not too much different than your typical town of 1,800. It's got a few bars, a church, Dollar General, of course, Casey's. So
He's underselling the Wooden Shoes. The Wooden Shoes basketball team might as well be the New England Patriots of the. I don't even know what single A, double A, triple A you guys are in basketball right now, but
pretty successful sports program over the years, and especially basketball, of course. But
so kind of since again, obviously we last kind of connected in high school. Kind of describe your journey from maybe just give us a little bit of background of how you went from T-Town to where you're sitting today and close to Columbia.
yeah, so after high school, I guess I actually went to community college for a couple of years and played baseball. Um, didn't work out too well. I had a shoulder surgery, and that put an end to that. So I moved down to Carbondale, Illinois. Went to Southern Illinois University, and got my bachelor's degree in crop and soil science. While I was at Carbondale, I worked a couple different internships. One was it was kind of a unique internship. It was a 15,000 acre grain farm in central Illinois, and it was kind of a crop scouting internship. So it was kind of taking a look at the crops every day, seeing where the weeds were growing, where the pests were, things like that. It was kind of my first taste into agronomy, and I really enjoyed that. Had some interactions with some company reps that serviced this farm, and liked the jobs that they had. The next year I did another internship with Monsanto, and kind of the same thing. I tended to gravitate towards the agronomist type jobs, and through conversations I realized that to get those types of jobs, it was probably going to take some kind of a master's degree at least. So I contacted Kevin Bradley at the University of Missouri, kind of in my last year at Carbondale, and I got set up to start on my master's program here at the University of Missouri. I guess it would have been back in 2016, in weed science. So in weed science, it's very applied agronomy. So working with herbicides and, herbicide resistant weeds and corn and soybeans, it all kind of goes together. We do a lot of work with cover crops and weed science, and it's pretty diverse in the types of projects that you get into. And then a couple years into, really about a year and a half into my master's, I decided to go ahead and go for my PhD. I always figured that if I left and went to work, I probably wouldn't want to come back and do it. So I figured if I was going to do it, I better do it all at once while I was there. So finished my PhD probably a little bit over a year ago. I took a job with Bayer Crop Science as a crop protection agronomist in Indiana, and covering Indiana and Kentucky. That job, I really enjoyed the job. It was kind of servicing the sales team from an agronomy perspective. So, any questions or trainings, helping their customers with agronomic issues, things like that. I also did a lot of pre and post commercial research on the Bayer product lineup and some of their pipeline products as well. So really enjoyed that job. Probably would still be doing it if I hadn't had this opportunity with Missouri Soybeans to come in as the director of agronomy and research. So it's kind of how we've gotten to this point. It's been a crazy year, finishing the PhD, moving to Indiana, moving back to Missouri. I wouldn't recommend going about things that way, but at the end of the day, I'm happy to be where I am. So,
Correct me if I'm wrong. You didn't grow up on a farm, did you?
my mom and dad did not farm. Do have some farming in the family that I was kind of around growing up, and always enjoyed the opportunities to go out to the farm and be a part of all that. But always wished my parents farmed, but it's one of those things you can't necessarily wish. So
Yep. Yep. So did you kind of know going into college? Was it, I guess, day one of college, you're thinking baseball? Are you also thinking ag is kind of the major, and maybe you'll see where it goes with that?
I did kind of always, consider myself fortunate. I always did kind of know I wanted to go into ag. Wasn't one of those that didn't have my mind made up until my senior year, of college. I always kind of knew I wanted to do ag. I didn't always know what I wanted to do, if I wanted to be more on the ag business side or more on the agronomy side. But that became pretty clear, just through the experiences that I had through undergrad and internships and different things. It was pretty clear to me that I enjoyed the agronomy side and helping farmers make decisions and overcome the challenges that they have to deal with in farming every day. So
Cool. So now that you're at Missouri Soybean, what can you give us kind of a 100-foot overview or 10,000 feet overview of what they do?
Yeah, it's a tougher question than you think. So Missouri Soybeans is a really interesting organization. So we're essentially, Missouri Soybeans is kind of an umbrella organization for two separate organizations. The Missouri Soybean Association, which is our policy group. So the Missouri Soybean Association works with legislators and policy to represent the interests of farmers. Whether that be in terms of regulatory issues or market development, or really anything that government or policy has control over agriculture on. That's kind of what the Missouri Soybean Association does. So that's one branch of our organization, and the other branch is the Missouri Soybean Merchandising Council, which would be more who I work for, specifically, and that is our checkoff organization. So, for anyone who isn't familiar in agriculture, there's a thing called the checkoff that farmers are, forced to give money to the checkoff through their grain sales. So for soybeans, it's half of 1% of all of their soybean sales every year goes to this thing called the checkoff. And half of that money is given to the national organization, which would be the United Soybean Board, and half of that money is given to the local organization, which is for us, the Missouri Soybean Merchandising Council. So within the Missouri Soybean Merchandising Council, we have this fund of money from the checkoff, and it is controlled by a farmer board. So we have a farmer board that represents growers across the state of Missouri and represents their interest essentially. And we kind of have three categories that we prioritize to spend that money on. And those are demand. So demand would be, trying to find where can we increase, soybean demand through new uses, or biodiesel, or what products could could soy oil or meal be used in to increase soybean sales, whether that's domestically or internationally. So that's one category. Another category, which is more in my camp, is research. So our farmers highly prioritize research for soybean production. Finding answers to the challenges that they're faced with across the state. Soybean breeding, there's a lot of programs that are a lot of research that we work in the organization. And then the third category that the Missouri Soybean Merchandising Council invests money into is education. So education of both farmers, youth, college-aged students, FFA, all of that. So those are kind of the three pots that the money is distributed through. And in education, we also, in some ways, kind of have some research projects, but they're a little bit more applied. They're a little bit more farm level. So we almost consider them more like farmer education projects for those studies.
Cool. Briefly on I assume the advisory, the policy advising group, they primarily probably focus on policy advice on the Missouri state level.
Yeah. I think for the most part, they're more focused on at the state level policy. Obviously we comment on more national policy topics. We'll make comments as the organization of Missouri Soybean Association and kind of our thoughts on things. But overall, at the state level, that's kind of where the Missouri Soybean Association spends most of their time.
Interesting. You brought up on the second half, the Missouri Soybean Merchandising Council. Obviously, research is an important part that you're obviously involved in. Is there any kind of research projects? I know you're newer to the position, but what kind of research is Missouri Soybean working on today?
Well, there's a few things that they're working on. One, MSMC really prioritizes the public breeding programs in Missouri. So we have two of them. One is housed here at the Bay Farm Research Facility, which is where I'm sitting today. And the other one is down at the Fisher Delta Center in Portageville, Missouri. Missouri is very diverse. So, what works in the boot heel of Missouri is very different than what works in Northwest or Northeast Missouri. So you do kind of have to, run different programs for the different geographies. But it is kind of interesting that our farmers do prioritize these public breeding programs so much. The public breeding programs in general, so university breeders, they were extremely popular many years ago before the introduction of like Roundup Ready. When Roundup Ready came to be, and the public breeders no longer had access to those technologies anymore, and those were the technologies that farmers wanted. The public breeding programs kind of, I don't want to say became obsolete, but they, weren't utilized by farmers as much because they would go to Pioneer or, Asgrow to get their seed because they wanted that Roundup Ready soybean seed, and the public sector couldn't offer those traits. But I think that, now in Missouri, we have access to some of those herbicide resistant traits and are starting to breed those into public lines that are going to be available to farmers. Other things that university breeding programs can offer is they can kind of fill, more niche topics. We're funding some research with flood tolerance and drought tolerance in soybeans, and those are genetics that maybe an Asgrow or a Pioneer could license, and eventually those traits would be available to farmers, but they were developed through this public breeding program that we're funding through MSMC. So that's kind of, what we're doing with funding the soybean breeding programs. We also fund other research projects like weed electrocution. We kind of know that our herbicide tools are working less and less every year due to weeds becoming resistant. So kind of trying to look ahead, maybe what are things going to look like in 10 or 20 years in the future, and kind of trying to prepare for that. So looking at some alternate non-chemical weed control methods. We also fund research at a more regional level. So those are some projects that are more specific to Missouri. But there are some regional soybean boards like the North Central Research Program and the Mid-South Soybean Board that would maybe fund a little broader research topic. So we fund money to those programs as well, and kind of have a little bit of input on the projects that are funded through those boards as well. And then I guess just thinking here, another program that we fund through MSMC is an on-farm strip trial program, which I'm really excited about being involved in. And it's essentially, bringing research to farmers' fields, having the farmers involved in the research, letting them see how the different treatments work for, yield, and letting them kind of have their hands involved with the research that we're doing, whether it's a fungicide trial or cover crop trial, whatever it is. But that's a pretty large investment that we make through MSMC, is in that strip trial program. So,
well, I had another question initially, but given that last comment, is it too late for a grower to get involved with those trials, or is there still ways for them to partake?
I would say honestly, as long as you haven't planted your field yet, we could probably still enroll a farmer into a strip trial program. All of that is actually ran through the University of Missouri. So Extension kind of houses the strip trial program. It's funded largely through MSMC and Missouri Corn and some other organizations as well. But I would say that farmers are still able to get into that program, and even if they weren't able to get into it for 2022, it's a program that's going to continue through hopefully many years into the future, and we're hoping to kind of grow it and have more results available to farmers, throughout the state and really throughout the country, so they can kind of see the results from that program. But like I said, if they couldn't get into it this year, there would definitely be opportunity moving forward into the future.
And I assume they would just reach out to the general line, if you will, for the Missouri soybean.
I would be able to direct anybody that had interest in the strip trials to the proper people to get them set up on that program.
Now, as we're entering, planting, it's past Easter, all that good stuff. What are some of the challenges or questions that you're getting asked, or your group's getting asked? I'm sure you got asked these exact same questions when you were traveling around Indiana and Kentucky as well. So what are some of the challenge folks are probably going to face here in 2022?
The biggest thing in agriculture is every year is different. The year effect trumps everything. You can plan for anything you want to in agriculture, but at the end of the day, the year could throw it all away. One thing from a soybean standpoint that has come up a lot this year is soybeans on soybeans. With soybean cost or soybean commodity prices right now, there's some farmers that are considering planting soybeans, following soybeans, which they may not have traditionally done. And that's also due to the fact that nitrogen fertilizer is as high as it's ever been, and same with other fertilizers. And soybeans can make their own nitrogen, so it really cuts a lot of risk out of production by growing soybeans again. So I've had a lot of questions on, what are the watch outs for soybeans on soybeans, and obviously those would be diseases are the main issue there. We have to really be cognizant of seed treatments and fungicides when you put soybeans on soybeans like that. It can be done, and in Missouri, as a matter of fact, we have about 6 million acres of soybeans every year that are planted, and about 3 million acres of corn. So naturally, every year in Missouri, we have a lot of soybeans that are planted back onto soybeans. So it's really not something as new in Missouri. Other states like the I states, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, they are more accustomed to maybe even going corn on corn, just throwing soybeans in here or there. So for those folks that are doing it, it may be something a little bit more out of their comfort zone than what we're used to here in Missouri. But you know, obviously this year with product shortages that are being continued to, they were very evident when I was with Bayer not too long ago, and I highly doubt that has changed much. And especially in a year when commodity prices are as high as they are, everybody wants to protect all of that yield with fungicides and have a robust herbicide program. And on a typical year, that's no issue. But this year, with the product shortages that we've seen, you know, getting a lot of questions on kind of bringing some of those older chemistries back that may not be quite as popular in recent years due to the fact that farmers may not be able to access the chemistries that they typically would have used. So that's something I know a lot of agronomists are spending a lot of time working with growers to work through those programs based on the product that they have available to them. So yeah, it'll be a really interesting year. Maybe it'll dry up. I don't know what the weather's like over there. We got about 2 inches of rain yesterday. So I think planting is a good week away at this point, at least, and it doesn't seem to be drying up anytime in the real near future. But as soon as that soybean or corn or wheat, I guess wheat's not going in the ground, but as soon as that crop goes into the ground, everything can change. So it's just a matter of being prepared for it, and that's kind of what we try to do through the research that we do here.
I'd be curious. I'm obviously not an agronomist, so why is Missouri so much more susceptible to soybeans, and why do so many more people do it versus, again, in the I states? It's more of a question of, can I do corn on corn?
A lot of it is just the soil types that we have here in Missouri. They aren't as rich and able to hold water like the soils can in Iowa and Illinois. They have very deep and rich topsoil. We have a lot of clay pan soils that basically you have a foot or so of topsoil, and then underneath it it's a clay pan that really ties up the water very tightly. And corn in Missouri is just a much riskier crop. In Iowa, you could pretty much bet your farm on a 200 to 250 bushel corn crop. In Missouri, if things turn dry, you could be looking at a 70 bushel corn crop, which isn't going to be real profitable. Soybeans typically are, some people kind of compare soybeans to a weed. I mean, they're just very adaptable, very kind of able to grow in those tough conditions and still make a pretty good crop even on a tough year. We may only be looking at 20-30% loss compared to some of our best yields. So that's one reason why soybeans are so popular in Missouri, is just the soils that we have here just aren't as productive for corn.
You already kind of noted the challenges regarding supply chain issues, which we're all aware of. And maybe a way to combat that is using some of the older products. Is there any other advice that you guys are giving for folks that are maybe obviously experiencing those challenges?
For me, from a crop protection standpoint, it's on a typical year, you may be able to have the product available to do a respray if things don't go well the first time around. This year, what I'm really kind of preaching is make sure that everything you're doing is done well, done the right way, done during the right conditions. For example, like a Roundup application, make sure we're using the right water conditioners and use the right rate. Don't try to skimp on rates just because it's a little bit more expensive this year. I think the worst thing that can happen is we go out with 20, 22 ounces of Roundup instead of 32 to try to save a little bit of money, but then that ends up not working to kill the weeds, and then now you're looking at a respray of another 22 or 32 ounces. So now you've ended up putting double the amount of product out there that you would have had to if it was just done right the first time. Another product would be like Liberty glufosinate. Glufosinate in real short supply this year, and it can be a kind of a finicky product to get just right. Weather is a big factor that can contribute to how glufosinate works. So just making sure we're spraying during the right weather conditions, using the right water volume, spraying weeds when they're not 10 inches tall, trying to spray weeds when they're 4 inches or less tall, and things like that. I think that's a big thing for me is just, we already know the products are short, so let's not waste anything that we do have. Let's make sure we get it out there and do it the right way.
Transitioning, obviously, we've mentioned the products that are used to kill weeds and their shorter supply. What kind of weeds are you guys taking particular note of this year?
We're kind of like the water hemp capital of the world. Probably not, but we do have a lot of water hemp issues, resistant water hemp. Some of the work that I did while I was at the University of Missouri working on my PhD and my master's was involved with water hemp and resistance. I think we're up to 6 or 7 way resistant water hemp in Missouri, and Illinois has a lot of that as well. So water hemp's always the big one. Palmer amaranth is another one that down in the boot heel of Missouri, we deal with a lot of Palmer amaranth. It's kind of transitions between the boot heel and the rest of the state between water hemp and Palmer amaranth. Another one this time of year that a lot of farmers deal with is mare's tail or horseweed. It's a winter annual, so it germinates in the fall and it's growing right now. And there's a lot of herbicide resistant horseweed and mare's tail that is kind of scattered throughout Missouri. So that's one that we get from a weeds standpoint, we get a lot of questions on this time of year, is how to control the mare's tail, because a lot of farmers have had issues in the past. So those are kind of the big three. Obviously there's others that we run into. Cocklebur is one that we don't have any resistance in cocklebur. Like we can still kill it with Roundup and things like that, but we focus so heavily on killing water hemp that cocklebur has kind of came back to be a more problematic weed late in the season, because a lot of the products that we use as a residual herbicide for water hemp don't work real well on cocklebur and these larger seeded broadleaf weeds. So the good news is we do know how to kill them once they emerge, but sometimes it can be a challenge when they come up late in the season because a lot of your herbicide labels are restrictive to applying anything kind of late in the soybean growing season. So um, once again, it goes back to every year's different. There could always be a weed that guys have a lot of issues with this year that maybe in past years wasn't as big of a problem. Uh, and once again, that's some of the research we fund through MSMC is looking at weed control and um, what does the future of that look like? What does this year look like? And moving forward. So
How does one stay connected with Missouri Soybean in regards to, and how do you guys stay connected with your growers in that regard? I mean, you say every season's different. Obviously, after planting, there might be some other weed that is pronounced. How do you guys kind of collect that information?
talking to farmers, seeing what they're dealing with, listening to our farmer board and the problems or the challenges that they're having. We also have we host field days at our research facility here in Columbia. So those are really great opportunities for us to get to kind of hear feedback from farmers on the issues that they're dealing with on their farm. But farmers have a lot of resources. They have agronomists that they work with from their retail outlet. They have agronomists that they deal with from the seed companies. So a lot of those guys are really really great at getting farmers information that they need. And obviously at Missouri Soybeans we have a website and at mosoy.org that we have some resources on. University of Missouri Extension is another really good resource for farmers in Missouri to access research that whether it's been funded through MSMC or through other sources, but is typically very specific to the issues that we're facing in Missouri. So
the best way to stay connected and keep up to date on some of those field days and other activities would be just go to the website kind of deal.
Farmers are always more than happy to always connect with farmers anytime if they want to give me a call or an email. But yeah, we typically distribute the field day information on social media and outlets like that. But yeah, the website's always a good place to go to find kind of what's going on at Mosoy.
Okay. As we start to wrap up things here, I want to do a little bit of a rapid fire. Are you getting a lot of cues on regenerative practices? I know you guys have that program that you're kind of working with farmers and they can enroll if they haven't planted yet or maybe look to enroll next year. But are you guys getting a lot of regenerative ag? How can I do this?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big thing right now, is no-till and cover crops and different, more, I guess, sustainable regenerative practices like that. So we fund a lot of research with cover crops. That's one thing that we have a lot of interest in. We use a lot of no-till and cover crops here on the farm. And the way I kind of look at that is we're not paying any bills with the grain that comes off this farm. So we kind of want to try to use it as a demo farm or a testing grounds per se of these different practices, so we can maybe identify some of the challenges here before we start implementing those onto growers' fields where that grain is actually used to support a family and pay the bills and things like that. But yeah, every year cover crops are a big topic, and I think that we do have a pretty good general idea on how to successfully utilize cover crops. In Missouri, we have about 10 million acres of crops, and we have about 1 million acres that is planted in cover crops, typically prior to soybeans. So we do, relatively have a good amount of cover crops that are grown in the state of Missouri. Obviously, we have a lot of room to grow in terms of cover crop adoption. But but it's something that I think a lot of guys, a lot of farmers have, at least if they're not putting them on their whole farm, they've at least tried them in some capacity, and started to play around with them a little bit as regulations uh, are going. I think farmers are going to realize that, or starting to realize that at some point it's probably going to be a requirement, or close to a requirement anyway, to no-till and to cover crops where possible. So yeah, that, I guess, long answer, but it is something that we've dealt with quite a bit.
And as we kind of move on to additional green initiatives, obviously carbon is a big buzzword. Um, are you guys doing anything on that front in regards to, are you guys trying to, maybe test a carbon credit at your test farm and market that and kind of have those results publicly, or what are you guys doing around that carbon market?
Specifically on the farm, if we've done that, Missouri Soybeans, our director of conservation agriculture, Clayton Light, is involved with a carbon pilot. Um, so there's so many unknowns about the carbon market, and what does it mean? And I think about it too, like, cereal rye, for example. So if you have a carbon initiative, and you're paying a farmer for growing a cereal rye cover crop on their farm, and it's verified through a satellite, or however they're going to verify it, that cover crop was planted. Well, if you terminate that cover crop when it's 6 inches tall with a herbicide, that cover crop captured a whole lot less carbon than if somebody terminated a cover crop when it was chest tall or shoulder tall, things like that. And like, those things are really unclear to me in terms of true carbon capture, uh, through cover crops. And then just the whole carbon market isn't real transparent to growers. They get paid through some of these programs, maybe 10, 15, maybe $20, depending on the program. But then they don't really know where did that carbon credit go? What did it sell for from somebody else? So I think part of the carbon pilot that we're involved in is really to try to bring a lot more transparency to growers on what is the full process of that carbon credit from their field to whoever ends up maybe purchasing it down the road, and just kind of showing them that whole process is a little bit more of what our carbon pilot is involved with.
Interesting. Last question. What technologies or genetic practices are you guys maybe excited about? I know you already mentioned at the beginning of this call, zapping, electrocuting weeds. I'm imagining some kind of John Deere tractor going over with their sensors, just putting little lightning bolts into the ground. Anything else?
There's so many technologies right now. One of the goals from Missouri Soybeans and the Bay Farm research facility is we are trying to transition it into a more of a smart farm model. So trying to utilize a lot of these precision technologies and automated technologies, robotics, things like that. So from my perspective, I'm excited about all of it. I think it's all super interesting, and just trying to a lot of it looks really good, but then when you start thinking about scale, that's where it becomes challenging. Robotics and drones and things like that. They work great on a 2-acre test plot, but when you start looking at a farmer that farms 15,000 acres, how does it work for them? So those are some things that I'm excited to get involved with. Is a lot of the new technologies, the see and spray, reducing just that overall chemical input, by actually spraying only the weeds that are up. Precision fertilizer applications, only applying the amount of fertilizer we need for a specific GPS point, rather than just a blanket application across the field. And yeah, there's just so much in that ag technology space right now that it's really exciting to kind of be in the position that I am where I get to test some of that and uh, be the group that gets to see how these things work and find their challenges before we promote them out to the Missouri soybean farmers.
Interesting. All right, I lied. That was the last question regarding ag. The actual last question is: I know you're obviously in Missouri. You played baseball in college. The St. Louis Cardinals will end the season where? With Albert Pujols hitting a walk-off home run in the World Series, and then
I think the last few years have been kind of frustrating with the Cardinals. So I don't have overly high expectations, but I anticipate they'll make the playoffs, whether that's through the wild card or winning the division. But I always like to hope they'll at least make the playoffs.
There you go. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation, and hopefully we can talk to you again soon.